Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here for Players Coalition press conference. We're excited to welcome new grant partners. As I'm sure you all know, the Players Coalition exists to end social injustices and advocate for racial justice, to remove barriers for future generations, barriers that many of us are all too familiar with. My name is Vincent Pierson. I'm a brand ambassador for the Players Coalition. I'm very excited to be here with you today and our esteemed panelists for not only the recap of the work that we've done, but the discussion that we'll get to have today as we dig into some of what is to come. So the Players Coalition work also revolves around 4 pillars. Those are criminal justice reform, community and police relations, education, and economic advancement. All of the organizations that you see represented today touch those pillars, if not all of them, then at least one. The organization Players Coalition was founded in 2017 by 2 players you might know, Malcolm Jenkins and Anquan Bolden, obviously surrounded by many other advisors and players involved with the task as well. We are all fortunate that those guys are not just world talent, world-class athletes, but world-class people, world-class collaborators interested in making an impact on their society. So since the founding in 2017, Players Coalition has given out over $50 million in grants to support organizations who are aligned. And for myself, being involved in DNI work, it's always great to see the work meeting the community, meeting the people. And that's what I've enjoyed most about meeting a lot of our grant partners. So before we move forward, I'd like to first recognize another one of our Players Coalition advocates in the audience, Rodney McLeod, who's joined us. Everybody give Rodney a round of applause. So we're going to talk about how the grant money is supporting these organizations, but before we do, I'd like to introduce another individual who's here to my right, Super Bowl champion, an author, philanthropist, and also one of those world-class collaborators who is a Players Coalition advocate. Please give a warm welcome to Kyle Arrington.
But comfortable, by the way. It's supposed to be restoration hardware, but no, thank you all for the opportunity to get a break from the kids. I'm kidding. But anybody marry small kids, you know. Okay. She knows. Okay. No, but it is an honor to be here on behalf of the Players Coalition and alongside athletes who use their platforms with intentionality to drive awareness, dialogue, and social change to issues that face our communities. And so with that, I would like to take the opportunity to bring your attention to the screens. We have a short 2023 video year in review recap that speaks directly to that intentionality behind Players Coalition and our work. DJ.
The Players Coalition is a vehicle. It's something that we created specifically for athletes who want to have impact. Your impact can go so much further when you can tie resources and other folks to amplify your voice and message. And that's what the Player Coalition is. It's simply a vehicle for people who want to have impact.
We as athletes understand that we have leverage, we have power. But it's one thing to play a sport and use brutal force. It's another thing to be able to use your mind. And I think that's what's most gratifying, being able to see how much impact it really makes on the young people and how it really changes their lives forever.
For us to be able to grant out to different organizations to make sure that they are able to accomplish the mission that they're on has been vital. I mean, we talk about education, gun violence, all of these issues that affect the communities that we live in. When we're able to partner with different organizations, I think it's a win-win for everybody.
Community partners like the Players Coalition understand the complexities of the community and all that it entails. There are different aspects, and they allow us to be effective, sustainable, and create long-term measures for effective change. It's incredibly important to have community partners who are bridging the gap.
So because of Players Coalition, the Trigger University is spreading prevention throughout our nation's capital and communities that are most vulnerable to gun violence, and we are forever grateful for that.
That's why we're here to try to build a coalition. It's not as about, what that money does in and of itself. It's about what it represents. And what it represents is we see you. We're aware, we care, the strength in numbers. So we're gonna continue to build our numbers and continue to make noise and not be silent on these issues. Good stuff. So our discussion today is intended to continue to highlight Players Coalition and its continuing unwavering commitment to the community to build stronger, safer, more equitable environments for all of us to thrive in. And that's through grant making first and foremost, as well as dynamic partnerships that we have on stage right here that you will learn more about. And honestly, it's strength in numbers. Like I talked about in the video. It takes, well, first and foremost, let me backtrack to say that I will not pretend to be an expert on the issues, but I do realize it is a multifaceted issue in and of itself, and it's going to take a multifaceted approach. So that means working with legislators, working with community leaders, working with each other to, once again, build that coalition. And we are honored, I'm honored to announce Players Coalition's newest national grant partners, Community Justice and People Justice. We are proud to be making a $100,000 donation to respectively to both organizations to further amplify your message, to further amplify your impact towards making our community safer, towards curbing the epidemic that is gun violence here in America. And before I pass it back to Vince, I just want to, once again, just being from the greater Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area myself growing up, I just want to commend you for your efforts, your heart value, and your heart equity, and once again, just making our communities better than we found them, all of us. So thank you once again for your efforts.
One of the things I really love about the Players Coalition is how it activates the power of sport. Nelson Mandela, the late Nelson Mandela talked about the power of sport and how it has the power to break down racial barriers, it has the power to activate local and national governments. Players Coalition activates that power. We talk about it a lot, but it's just dormant a lot because we don't know how to activate it. This is an organization that's bringing all of us together to do just that. So before we move forward our conversation, a few folks I want to recognize. First, Tandy McNulty, would you mind standing for me? Tandy is the founder, CEO of 1 Million Madly Motivated Moms, who just launched their Right Response Guide, which helps to curb violent response to trauma reaction. So a round of applause for that. One of our grant partners. So thank you for being here with us today. They have a table set up in the back to learn more about the work that they're doing. And then if I could have my good brother Antoine stand as well. We're fortunate to have one of the founders of the Players Coalition. I know you didn't want to keep it. As possible, and thank you for being here today to support this announcement. So I want to start with just a quick intro for each of our community organizations represented. And then as I do the introduction, why don't you just share a little bit about your organization? I'm going to begin with Mashea Ashton, Digital Pioneers Academy, which is a tuition-free public charter middle and high school. So if you don't mind, just talking a little bit about the impetus of your organization and the impact.
Thank you, and I just want to thank you all for having this convening of really great partners and friends. My name is Mashea, like paper Mashea Ashton, the founder and CEO of Digital Pioneers Academy. I have had the best professional career. I worked in Newark, in New York, in Chicago, all across the country. And about 8 years ago, our family moved back to DC with the mission for me to open a college prep middle school. And then I read one article that said there's 1 million high-paying, high-demand jobs in computer science, and I thought, well, who's doing something about this? We clearly have a supply of talent. We have this gap. Let's close the gap. And that's really what inspired Digital Pioneers Academy. We have an amazing mission to develop the next generation of innovators. And we really want our scholars to not just consume in the digital economy, but be a part of creating. And because of that, we're unapologetic college prep, computer science, committed to all students, and unapologetically Black and excellent. And with our 500 students, I would love to tell you about so many things, but in a year, we'll have our first graduating class of innovators. So I'm incredibly grateful to be here. I want to say the Players Coalition has supported us from the beginning, so thank you. It's because of our efforts around STEM education. But today, I'll be honest, I'd rather be here for a completely different reason. I'm here because of our school's experience with gun violence, particularly last year. Last year, we lost 4 students to gun violence. October 31st, Antoine Manning, who was 14, was shot 22 times outside of his house in front of his mom. On November the 26th, Ja'Kai Snyder, while he was walking to a football game on Thanksgiving weekend, was shot 2 times and murdered. On June 19th, DeMarcos Pickney, which was Father's Day, and his cousin, Kevin Mason, were murdered while they were riding scooters outside on Langston Lane. And on June 26th, just the first couple days of summer, Jalen Osborne was murdered. In 238 days, we lost 4 students. Tragic and devastating. I'll tell you, there are days where I just can't tell that story, but I'll say their names because they left me and a whole school community just devastated. And to be honest, the reason I'm here today is because we can't achieve our mission around developing the next generation of innovators unless we come together and do something transformative and disruptive when it comes to youth violence. Thank you.
Such a powerful message that also served as a strong segue for Tia Bell and her organization, the Trigger Project, as it aims to shift the narrative around gun violence and how we have that conversation, but also how we are proactive around creating safe environments for our children. So Tia, please talk a little bit about the Trigger Project.
Yes, thank you, Vince. Thank you, Players Coalition. Everyone who is with us under the sound of my voice. I'm grateful to have you here. My name is Tia, founded the Trigger Project 4 years ago. And Trigger stands for True Reasons I Grabbed the Gun, Evolved the Risk. And I set out 5 years ago now, just with righteous anger to prove a point that the shooter and the victim have a very thin line between them. Most people have heard of Trigger in the last 5 years. But I believe that I started this work when I was 10 years old. My mother fell victim to gun violence. She was shot twice in broad daylight by other women. I'm sorry, I never choke up on this, but just from being with her, seeing that she could have been on that other side of the gun, knowing that there were circumstances and conditions that led her to having to use a gun to solve problems, to provide for her children. And then sitting in rooms with national organizations from all over the country who had no thought of really what my story or anybody from DC, our community story, really meant. Fighting for a lot of policy, fighting for ways that would help gun violence prevention, mobilize, but also just without our voice. So I thought, why not bring the voice of the shooter? Gunderstanding is the token term we like to use, but bring understanding to this talk, to all of your hearts and minds, so that we can spread prevention. Like I said, I started this work when I was 10. God called me and I answered the phone. When my mother became a victim, I asked the protectors in my neighborhood not to retaliate, not to do anything. I was 10 and I was probably 30 years old in a 10-year-old body from what I had been exposed to and just being the oldest and being born to a teen mom. And then by definition, she was a young person. She was only 25 when she was shot. So by brain definition, which I learned getting my master's in youth development, she was young, you know. And so today, still living in that 10-year-old little lady's mind, you know, wanting to protect everybody, wanting to take care of everybody, wanting to provide, using basketball to leverage resources. If I scored 30, I woke up with shoes on my porch. So my mom didn't have to go out and do what she used to do that, you know, led her to that situation. And so I've done a lot of just intentional decisions that have been very hard. But if you are an athlete, you know that discipline comes with that practice. And so just in the context of our conversation today, basketball was my first protective factor. And when you talk about true reasons I grabbed the gun involved in risk, there are risk factors like having not a caring CEO and principal to make sure that you're supervising Uber to school so that you can get there safely in one piece, and providing additional supports for parent night to make sure that they're in one piece. But just through the CDC, if you go to the CDC website, they will tell you that there's risk factors that lead to youth violence and there are protective factors that lessen the likelihood. So I was severely protected. And so we started T.R.I.G.E.R now to address, like you said, the normalcy of gun violence in our everyday lives, but also to change the narrative about it, because it is important that people know that gun violence is a disease. It's a disease that spreads through model behavior. This disease was limited to the research and the dollars that it received from our country in the 90s on purpose. And so 25, 30 years later, we're bringing it up and we're pounding it down people's throats so that they can digest that this disease can be prevented, because we all have a trigger finger, and yes, Black youth disproportionately face the conditions that lead to them having to pull the trigger finger. But we are protection. Players Coalition is protection. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to do this, but shameless plug. We were allowed to run our program. So T.R.I.G.E.R University, T.R.I.G.E.R Project is our organization aiming to change the normal narrative, aiming to bring root causes to the table so that people understand the conditions. We look at the soil so that the gun violence doesn't bloom, but that the quality of life for young people who could be contributing society members, wholesome innovators, can spread prevention. But T.R.I.G.E.R University is a space that we had to create because there's nowhere to go. For our babies, for me, when I was 10, no one told me I was infected. If my mom was infected, I was exposed. And so we're going hard. And I used to play ball. I look like Lisa Leslie, but I look more like my mother. I look more like my mother who's with my kids right now and still surviving. And so, like I said, 23 years later, I refuse to let them criminalize us and arrest our way out of this and public safety our way out of this. We're going to public health our way out of it. Thank you.
So much, T, and I'm having to stop myself from building on it because I have so many questions I want to ask. Amber, I was fortunate to sit in a workshop led in conjunction with Amber and Jami, but Amber is a leader of community justice. Can you talk a little bit about your organization and the work that you're doing around gun violence prevention and addressing policy around that?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Morning still. Morning. I'm Amber Goodwin and from Texas, but I'll take 30 seconds of personal privilege before we get started, if that's okay. I did not know that Anquan was going to be here. Anquan and I, he probably does not remember this, but 26 years ago, we both started at Florida State University together. I was on the swim team. I was the only Black person on the swim team whenever he was on the football team. And so I think that it's very kismet, if you would, that we are sitting here today. And so I just want to thank you for your incredible work, your leadership that was happening probably, sorry to date us because that shows you that we were in college 26 years ago. But just thank you for your incredible leadership and for everybody here. And I also just want to thank Rebecca and Isis and Tori and everybody for putting this together because this is incredible. I don't think 8 years ago, whenever I started community justice, I could have ever thought about this. And so we're an organization that works to build power with and for communities of color to end gun violence. And that is a mouthful, but the way that I got into this work about 10 years ago, I had been working on, policies. I've been working for elected officials. I've worked on Capitol Hill. And I was working on gun violence prevention, and I specifically was being asked to go to a ton of policy conversations around a lot of what Tia is talking about. And I was getting in a lot of spaces in a lot of rooms, like the White House, and I was usually the only Black person there. I was the only woman that was there. And I had a lot of, at the time, unearned privilege because I'd never been directly impacted by gun violence at that point. And so what I did as a really great organizer that I was that I organized myself into a job. And I started community justice. And so we have 3 pillars that we work on. The first is organizing. So we organize Black and brown people all across the country. We're building a base of supporters, whether or not that's during election year or around policies to support the leadership, the work that people are doing on the ground to support survivors on gun violence policy. For such a long time in this country, when we think about gun violence, we only think about bad things that are happening in DC, or we think about things like mass shootings. And we don't think about everything that's in between. And when we think about things that are happening in our communities, we don't think of policy responses. And so we decided to disrupt that. So I like the word disrupt, and think about policies that were driven by communities of color and by Black folks on every single level of government. And so besides organizing, we also do policy. So we write policies. We have Black folks like violence interrupters, people who have been on all sides of the gun, who are actually writing policies with mayors. I'm hoping they become mayors one day as well. And then we also work specifically on passing advocacy and doing advocacy across the country. And what I will say, I couldn't be here today, but when I started working on gun violence, there were almost, I would say, I don't want to say negative dollars, there was $0 in the federal budget for gun violence in communities of color. And survivors, people on the front lines fought for a very, very long time and got a lot of resources. And yesterday we were talking about, now we have over $14.1 billion that is in the federal government just for Black and brown led community organizing that's happening on gun violence. And so that's the work that we did. In the last 2 years, we've had 2 big pieces of legislation. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which is the first bipartisan, just the first gun legislation at the federal level in over 30 years. And then we helped to create the first Office of Violence Prevention ever in the history of the United States. But one of the most exciting things, I think, for me and probably all of us up here, being former athletes here, is just the incredible work that we've been able to do, not just as an organization, but in partnership with so many people. Tia sits on our board, one of our boards, and so it's just the incredible camaraderie between so many of us up here. And so we're just really excited about this partnership and continuing to lead the work with Black and brown people on the front lines.
I love that, the connection here, right? To talk about welcoming you all to the DC family. Y'all are already family. And then y'all were family 26 years ago, you said?
So we started college when we were 5, right?
And last but certainly not least, Jami, Hodge, representing EJUSA USA. Again, I got to sit in the gun violence prevention workshop. Jami, you talked very eloquently about a lot of those preventative solutions, those preventative factors, and how we can be intentional about it. Your organization focusing on shifting our response to violence and viewing it with a more trauma-informed lens. And talk a little bit about your organization and the work that you've done.
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Jami, and just bear with my voice, of course, and on a day that's full of such blessings, I feel like, I'm not going to let anything get in my way and push through. So one, just thank you to the Players Coalition, to Rebecca, Isis, for the entire team who have been working with us over the last several weeks, and certainly and Quan and Malcolm and all the players, kind of these amazing men who have decided to use their platform to elevate this important work. So a little bit about Justice USA. First, actually, I'm gonna start with a little bit about what brings me to EJUSA and what makes me so passionate about the work that we do. I sit before you as a person who has seen the impacts of violence in my home. My father suffered a traumatic brain injury from an armed robbery when I was in high school. That didn't just change his life, it changed all of our lives. I also sit here as someone who has seen up close the impact of the violence of our incarceration system when my brother turned to drugs because of the trauma we were living with after my father's attack, and ultimately ended up serving time because he was stealing from work when that addiction got out of control. And so I took the job of working in the system as a prosecutor, as someone who knew that this was a system, or at the time I believe was broken, thinking that, so being someone impacted who knew that the system really had nothing for us when my family was suffering active violence, and also seeing that the system only harmed my brother, who's one of my favorite people in the world, when he would have a response to the trauma that we were dealing with. So I thought being a person who could hold some of that power as a prosecutor could help change it and make sure that power was used differently. But the journey I've been on is the journey that at EJUSA we are trying to take the world on. And what I learned in my 12 years as a prosecutor is that we do not address violence the right way. In our system, all we do is focus on punishment. We do not have any pathways to healing. We are not actually interrupting violence. In our system, we show up after the fact and we punish, and that's it. And so learning about an organization, and I had spent some time working in criminal justice reform, and that work is really important. And I know the Players Coalition has done a lot there, but what you find in criminal justice reform is a lot of time the answers carve out violence. So we'll change moral reform, we'll expand diversion, but we'll only do it for low-level misdemeanor offenses. When it comes to violence, the sole thing we are willing to do is punish. And so the work that we do, and so many of these incredible partners up here is doing, is how do we address violence by actually interrupting the cycles and addressing the root causes that cause violence. And I love the point, and I love what you're doing, Tia, at Trigger Project, because the other piece of that work is changing the narrative. We do understand that, and I can tell you, I never, in my time as a prosecutor, had a case where someone caused real harm who had not been a victim first. And usually it started in childhood, and we did not show up for them. And in their trauma, and in them not being resourced, and yeah, it's not surprising, because exposure to violence and trauma is a driver of violence. So we shouldn't be surprised that they end up harming other people. So having this work where our target is to focus on the hard issue of violence, to resource and support folks like Tia who are on the ground, sort of sits above those who are on the ground doing those direct services, and we sort of see ourselves as a backbone. We help take founders like Tia, who, and like a Mashea, who have a passion, but maybe don't know how to get their 501c3, don't know how to build a board, don't know how to write the first event. We do that through our work, through some of our technical assistance work. We also create healing spaces. These people who are doing this work every day are doing it from a place of their own pain. They've turned their pain into purpose and passion, but they need someone to pour into them. So we will host retreats. We will create a community where we really hold sacred our responsibility to heal the healers who are doing the work. And then importantly, it is so important that we change the narrative. We have to address the racial inequity, the racial injustice that's at the root of this. We have to tell the truth about the stories. We are okay with punishment as a response because of who we're okay punishing. And so we have to address the narrative that violence attaches to Black skin, dangerousness attaches to Black skin. And so we've got to be honest about our legacy of slavery that has influenced where we are in our punishment system. And so being able to tell the stories and tell the truth about that history is part of what we do. And then to lift up the solutions that are working. We need the world to know that when violence happens, there's something we can do besides sending more police and increase our punishment, that there are solutions that are working every day right now on the ground. One of the places we've done our deepest work is Newark, New Jersey. It has a robust, community-based public safety system that involves so many grassroots organizations who are serving people. They are at a 60-year low in homicides. but not enough people know that story and know that these things are working. So one of the things we're so excited about in this partnership is the willingness of the Players Coalition and the players there to use their incredible platforms to help us change these narratives and lift up the fact that there are solutions that are working. So thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you all for sharing your stories a bit. Now, the way that this will work from here, I've got just a few questions that I'll ask our panelists, and then we've got a few microphones set up in the middle of the aisle here. So if you have questions you'd like to have answered, feel free to line up, and once we get through that, we'll happily address those. So, and this was actually a great segue from Jami, when you talked about players and the platforms that they can bring to amplify these messages. So Kyle, for you, as an individual athlete, why is this important for you? And then how has coming into the Players Coalition family allowed you to perhaps even hone in on your own passions and where that impact can be created?
Well, Vince, I'm glad you asked that question. Seriously, the importance for me is to begin with, I never wanted to define as a football player. I never wanted to define me. I don't think we're all defined by our careers, by our accolades. We're not even defined by our mistakes. For me, I always want to be defined by my character, my core values, what I believe in. And what I believe in is that we all have, people, USA talk about, it's life living to happiness, but that looks different for everybody, right? So it's not defined print in there. So for me, when it comes to, not even big, when it comes to Players Coalition, it's understanding, realizing, and then utilizing that said, once again, intention behind the unique platform that we have to bridge those gaps that sports provides, to break barriers, to have conversations, to move the needle, drive narratives in terms of creating more safe, more equitable, more productive, more creative environments. And there's also the understanding of the notion, if you will, that we all carry backpacks, right? Bear with me. Whether that be fear, stress, anxiety, depression, rejection, social inequalities, systemic injustices, whatever it is that you carry, we carry. It's ours to carry. What I don't want, what Players Coalition doesn't want, is any man, woman, child, especially child, to feel like they're handicapped, and that determines what they can achieve, their amount of success, if you will, in this world, what their dreams would be. So it is my commitment, and Players Coalition commitment, to make for the next generation that load feel a little less light, and as well creating a rubric, if you will, for that generation to do the same thing, and so forth. And just circling back to the theme that we're here today, in regards to gun violence and gun violence prevention, like most communities, if you ask them, they know what they need to feel safe. And it isn't antiquated ideas or policies to promote heavier police presence. It's the idea of the notion as well that everyone wants to feel that they have the tools, the resources, the exposure, and the opportunity, and we do. This is America, right? This is the richest nation in the world, and we're just speaking facts. And what we're lacking is a mobilization of compassion, coalition, if you will, of compassion. And once again, I'm just honored and proud to be a part of such an amazing panel, partners who are moving the needle, doing their part to helping us realize what that American dream should stand for.
It's really a powerful message, because the element of compassion is exactly what I hear represented. But you're right in that is also what is far too often lacking, especially when we get to the point of solutions. So for Mashea and Tia, some of the themes that I heard you all talking about when you shared in your organizations revolved around this idea of the public health lens and view on these issues. Perhaps viewing gun violence more of a public health issue than a gun violence issue. Can you talk a bit about that shift? And then how your organizations collaborate locally, recognizing that you're able to create tremendous impact, focusing on an individual community. And I can repeat that question if you need me to as well.
So
first, I'm sitting here like, wait, why am I here again? You know, with all these amazing partners. And honestly, I'm a school person. Like, I was trying to get kids into college, to education and teachers. And the reality is that schools have a role in disrupting the violence that's happening with our scholars. And so, and I don't want to do the work that you all are doing. I want to partner with organizations because it's hard enough teaching a kid how to read, write, and do math. But what we have to do is partner. So your question is really a tough one. I think we have to really think about the root causes and we have to think of solutions. And I will tell you, I have been particularly inspired by a recent book that I was reading. You may have heard of it. It's by an author by the name of Malcolm Jenkins. What winners won't tell you. And so I was really inspired by some messages and solutions in reading that book. And the first is that he talks about, and particularly for youth who in the most under-resourced parts of our country, that there's a constant feeling that trouble is at your footsteps. That's what our youth feel. And when I think about our 4 students who lost, what you need to know about them is 3 of them were serious athletes, football athletes, had won at the highest level for middle school sports in Washington, D.C. But because we were a brand new school, we didn't have a football program. And quite honestly, that's where the Players Coalition stepped up for us. Because the Players Coalition gave us a $100,000 grant, Kyle was there to announce it with our team. That led to the Washington Commanders giving us $75,000 and cleats for our kids. And with that, that's for the Commanders coming back this hope. And we launched our first football season, and while our record was 2-4, we won in so many ways. And I have to tell you, just to give you the concrete example, I want to tell you the story of KD. So KD is one of our football players who lives in a city that spends $1 million a year on every homicide. He lives on Langston Lane, where students experience violence once every 2 weeks. Katie was there when his friend and teammate DeMarcos was killed on the lane for riding a scooter. Katie lives every single day that experience and that feeling of trouble being at your footsteps. And the trouble is, it's the pressure, it's violence, it's poverty, it is trauma, it is all of the things that we already know. Katie is the most at risk of either picking up a gun or being the victim of violence. We know this. But KD has goals and he has a GPS system. Let me tell you what I mean. KD wants to take care of his family. He wants to get good grades. He wants to go to college and he wants to play football. This last year, because of the support from the Players Coalition, KD had a 3.0 GPA. He had a 95% attendance. He earned all second team conference. He's a freshman football player, so he played both offense and defense. He earned second team all conference as a freshman on defensive side, and he was nominated by his coaches as well as his teammates to be one of our most valuable players. He had goals and a GPS system, and the GPS system is his mom, programs, principals, teachers, partners, guiding him on this journey to live and to have a productive life. But here's where sports come in. Katie has hope. And for him, hope is through sports. This is an amazing weekend for so many reasons, but in December, 3 Washington Commanders came to our school to give our students Super Bowl tickets. Derek Forrest, Sadiq Charles, and Cam Crow. They gave Katie a ticket to Vegas to be here for the Super Bowl. was an exciting moment. And I walked up to Katie and I said, "You're going to Vegas. You're gonna be in the Super Bowl. How do you feel?" You know, like those commercials, you know, and he looked at me as serious as I'm looking out in this hallway and said, "Principal Ashton, you gotta get me off the lane. You gotta get me off the lane. You gotta get my family off the lane. I gotta get off the lane." Because he feels that pressure, that trouble is just at his doorstep. But here we are. Sports and football is giving him hope. And I need you all to know that sports, your voice, your courage, the work that we're doing is actually giving our youth hope. So when we think about the problems, we kind of think about the solutions. Our kids need goals and they need a GPS system that allows them to be on their best journey for their best life.
That's powerful. Please slam it, throw it, drop it, all of the above. Give it up for Mashea, please. You are the epitome, really, the personification of prevention. Guys, prevention is defined, in the world, obviously, as the absence of, you know, where there is no COVID, where there is no flu for your baby girl, where there is, no cancer, no HIV/AIDS, no obesity, there's prevention. Where there is gun violence, KB has that access to a gun, which is as simple as getting this. That's what my babies tell me, who are called preventionists, excuse me, they're youth ambassadors, but he has that easy access. He has that anger, that denial. He has every level of grief working in his brain and in his body. Stunning, that ability to make a GPA, to get up and get out of bed and go to school, to put on the pads. And he's doing it because of people like Mashea. Our youth are invisible in the nation's capital. In my hometown, in a place I'm so proud to call mine, I'm also devastated by the lack of action that is driven for them and by them. Our babies, their voices are ignored. And so the Trigger Project, we are, you know, I don't have another way because this is what they tell me I do. They tell me I step on necks, and that sounds violent. And I don't want to perpetuate that at all because we are prevention. We are the absence of disease. But we're putting a lot of pressure on our city leaders, on the entire youth ecosystem, on families to understand the disease of violence so that they have a new and reformed hope. A new way of looking at it. Through this public health plans, we can bring optimism and education and awareness. But we blame the parents in our city, we blame the youth, we blame community, we blame the schools, instead of looking at it again through my basketball mind. This looks like a scouting report. Okay, faith-based leaders are doing this, small businesses are doing this or aren't doing this, the government's doing this, our professional athletes are doing this, parents have this. Culture says this, media perpetuates this. Let's get youth voice in there and let's center it and let's go based on them so that we can prevent future gun violence. There's no plan on our future. We're just band-aiding and reacting and working out of crises. And now we have this national attention on our city, but we've been in a crisis. Last year, the first homicide of our city was a 17-year-old boy, a student, whose school didn't know how to appropriately respond to his siblings, his family, his classmates. They've lost 2 students since then. This year, we lost a young lady. She was home on break from LSU in DC. Lost her life, first homicide, back to back. Our city, our nation's capital, have lost youth first. And there really isn't an outrage. So when you see just the stagnant, you know, lack of just outrage, really, you have to lean on coalition and collaboration and connection because there is really no other way. Like Kyle said, the community, we know the real DC, we know what we need, but we are just not being supported. We're on the menu versus being at the table. So again, Trigger is just, really driven to intersect youth development and public health so that we can work to prevent a future free from gun violence. And I'll leave you with this definition of prevention from the APHA, which is the American Public Health Association, which is like older than everybody in this room put together. But essentially, if you look at public health, which is the science and art of our protection of our health. So where we live, love, work, play, laugh, grow, learn, that is the promotion of our health and well-being for all. That is public health. Public safety is the enforcement of protection. It is narrow. And so when you look to align youth development and public health, we can work to prevent future gun violence. We can center our youth, our most important population, you know, at the front of this fight. And really, in the essence of the prevention definition, we can work proactively in our efforts and our actions and our words. Because now y'all not gonna say, oh, they just did that, because they out here going crazy. They wild, and I'm trying to be politically correct right now with all the jargon. They lunching, they tripping, whatever it is that you said, stand on business. They're not standing on business. Or why did they rob them? Why did they carjack? You know, you guys may know this, but the commander was his number was 4, his last name is Robin. Thank goodness. 4 means so much to me. Anyways, we had a football player carjacked by a 15-year-old last year. And like Jami says, it's not, police cannot show up and address that. For Brian from the commanders or for that young man. So if you all can spread prevention intentionally from whatever role you have, you are a part of this fight. And I heard Amber say earlier, my sister and mentoring this work, and I intentionally wanted to be on the board because I was like, you know, we got to beat it. But no, we all are survivors. Every single heartbeat in this room has been impacted by gun violence. Life has been changed by that gun. And it's whether we scroll, read about it, hear about it, Las Vegas, we know about the mass shooting. There's been four homicides here already. In the Super Bowl city, San Francisco has lost 2 people. Kansas City has lost 7. In DC, we lost 11 in January alone. It started with a young person. Whether you read, scroll, or hear about it, you are surviving. If you take ownership in that title, you grow to understand and look at this condition, empathy and sympathy and collaboration. So to answer your question, intersecting youth development with public health is how we do it. And school is a part of protection. Please go and look up the CDC, youth risk and protective factors. Having high aspirations can protect you. I had that, KD has. Having a pro-social positive place to go. Trigger University is housed in her school. You know, so supervision can prevent from violence. These are little things that we all can play a role in. So please follow us and stay connected with us and learn to be spreaders of prevention. Thank you.
Very valuable. Coming to Amber and Jami, and now you are doing this work around gun violence prevention, around community-based responses, around what can be confused for defunding the police, right? I don't know, I'm allowed to say that. It can be confused when we talk about alternate solutions, but you're also doing it at a national level. Can you talk a little bit about just what that's like from the national level, advocating for policy, because it can look different community to community, but you're doing the work ideally to benefit all.
Yeah, it's a tough question. I'm going to answer it though, but I will just say the issue of gun violence is it's hard to quantify how bad gun violence is. But also the good news is, because we have good news on this panel, is that we know the solutions, and the solutions on gun violence have 100% of the time come from people on the front lines. It's come from the survivors, it's come from young people, it's come from people that are actually doing the work on the ground. Just for context, though, every year, anywhere from 45 to 50,000 people die that we know of by gun violence. And the majority, the lion's share of that is usually anywhere from 2/3 of the 50,000 people are die by suicide. When we're talking about homicides, we're talking anywhere from 12 to 13,000 people. Black people in this country, we are only 13 to 14% of the population, but we're anywhere from 60 to 70% of the homicides that happen by firearms. And so for our work, we laser focus on what type of solutions exist when there is a firearm that is present. And we're so grateful to work with everyone here because they're addressing so many different factors that we address and what our solutions look like. But our focus is on violence prevention whenever there is a gun and what solutions specifically around policy. And Kylie brought up compassion. And one thing that I will just say is that I know in 2020, there was just so much compassion, especially for people who look like us. I was like, okay, we got like 2 months until people stop caring about Black people. So like, let's just like get on, ask about a whole bunch of other things. And I remember one of my friends saying, you know, I really hope that people don't, I really hope that people don't learn to hate these systems that we're talking about breaking down and never learn to love Black people and never learn to love like these kids that we're talking about. Because I know I get invited to a lot of rooms because people are like, oh yeah, this, you do whatever. And they won't invite other people to rooms that are actually on the front lines that are actually doing the work. And so my responsibility and all of our responsibility is to make sure that the folks on the front lines that are doing this work are first and foremost. They're guiding the policies, they're leading the work. And we can only, I said, you know, there's 50,000 people that we know of that are shot and killed, but there's hundreds of thousands of people that are shot and survived. There are hundreds of thousands of people that have the mere presence of a firearm whenever it comes to domestic violence or interpersonal. This is one of the most shocking statistics that I do know is the mere presence of a gun in a home and domestic violence. A woman is 500 times more likely to die just because if there's a gun in, if there is interpersonal violence. And when we're talking about Black and brown people, it's disproportionate across the board. Every single type of gun violence in this country, it disproportionately impacts our communities. And so we have to work collaboratively. Like there's no other way to do it because we'll never be able to tackle this huge issue. But what I was telling Isis earlier was that, you know, we have to remain hopeful. We all believe that another world is possible versus the one that we've been given, especially as Black people in this country. But we are going to have to fight really hard for it. And so a lot of our work is just modeled off of, you know, not mostly staying in our lane, but like focusing on our work in ways that are collaborative, but also making sure that we have the folks, the survivors and the folks on the front lines that are doing this work from that public health approach.
I think I'm going to try to tackle a little bit about comment about the police. We'll start there. And it really is still along the lines that it takes collaboration and coalition. When I mentioned the work earlier and the success of really having community members and community-based organizations really working together to address violence and prevent violence, the police are at the table. What's different is they're not leading the conversation. When they have their spaces, those are community-led spaces. One of the things we do in Newark is we have a trauma to trust program, which is a community-led process and then training where we bring community members and police together to learn about trauma. And some early results of that work, we saw that use of force complaints against officers went down as a result. But also having them come together allows for when the mayor, Mayor Baraka, was ready to have an Office of Violence Prevention by taking part of that public safety budget, that police budget, to be able to fund these community-based solutions. There wasn't an objection by the police department because they'd already been in coalition, they'd already been moving. So there are ways to do this that aren't like we have to be enemies. It's just, well, part of it is we actually need to know better, you know, and know that there are solutions that we can all get behind. The other piece I want to just talk a little bit about is that that importance of building the community safety and doing that again, you know, as everybody's been saying here in partnership, but also just I think that you were getting at this is sort of that organizing, which certainly Amber's talked a lot about, and community justice is such a close partner in that effort. But when we're in places and sort of, we kind of go in with like, how can we help meet needs, you know, and I mentioned some of that earlier. But then it's like, all right, we're now here, we're in conversation, we're addressing, we're looking at gaps. How do we organize? How do we come together and use voices and elevate voices? And some of the ways we do that is through writing op-eds and placing them and helping folks get in front of their city councils or in front of their leaders who control the budgets, right? Because so much of this is, it's not that, again, as it's been said, we don't know how to keep ourselves safe. For many of our communities, especially communities where police aren't a place of safety or a place of fear, we are doing the things. It's just that most people don't know, and they're often very much not resourced. And so much of the advocacy, some of which Amber's been talking about, has been to finally get those resources. But that's new, you know, this is the new thing. And so we also need people's patience and time to make sure, like, give it a chance. And then also let's make sure that money actually gets done. It's great that the federal government has designated it, but it's really hard. There's so much bureaucracy and so much process. And so some of our work is trying to help work with partners to figure out how do we clear the red tape so the money actually gets to the organizations who are on the front line. So there's been a lot of progress, but there's still much for us to do. And I think the one thing we definitely want to leave with people is that this work, the vision of a world where violence is rare, the vision that we all want, where safety is redefined as more than the absence of violence, as the things that communities need to thrive, where people are well and they're full and they're healed. That takes all of us, you know. So we invite everyone, please, like, follow our organizations, support our work, and just so grateful for the opportunity to be part of this amazing coalition.
I need to say, sorry, just one other thing, so you brought the elections. One other thing that I would just say is, because I think we have to see more flexibility to also do some stretch our muscles in that way too. And so to Jami's point, they do such incredible work in so many facets of the root causes of violence, and so many folks up here. One big issue that has not really been addressed previously is making sure that voters are educated about the issue of gun violence, especially Black and brown voters who are actually coming out and voting and wanting to know, how is my elected official actually voting on the issue of gun violence in my communities? And so some of us up here do that, and some of us also say, you know, we need to vote this person out because they are not doing the right things. They're actually actively asking the wrong questions whenever it comes to public safety. They're asking us about, oh, are we taking money from this pot over here and this pot over here, instead of asking us what it is that we need to feel safe and what does safety look like for us. And so all of this also includes like making sure that we're out there knocking on doors, educating people about the issue of gun violence and how it's impacting us, and making sure that we're holding, yesterday at our training, which I think we have some folks from Nevada partners here as well, but yesterday at our training, someone said that the A in advocacy stands for accountability. And so holding elected officials accountable for the violence that is happening disproportionately in our communities is also important to us as well.
And again, I was fortunate to sit and watch your two organizations lead the gun violence prevention workshop yesterday. I got to see in real time how you elevate the voices of the people who are experiencing the issues of their community. We were at Nevada Park. I think we have our friends from Nevada Partners here. Yesterday for that workshop, but getting to see how you bring your national resources and knowledge, your expertise, and just make that available to those who are doing the fighting on the ground here locally. I really appreciate that. And really appreciate you all sharing your stories and the work that you do. I can tell you, inspiration is not difficult to come across when you're doing work with the Players Coalition, but it's uniquely felt this week. It's uniquely felt today, getting to hear the stories and recognize the work that you do. In Nelson Mandela's quote, he says, hope, sports can bring hope where there was only once despair. And that's what I was thinking on as listening to you all speak, that at the end of the day, we get to bring that compassion that ultimately leads to hope. If we can sustain that, then we can really see change in all four of our key pillar areas. Before we move to Q&A from the audience, I want to get Kyle to share a message that will close us out.
Thank you, Vince. Yes, so when I had the pleasure, utmost pleasure to visit the Digital Pioneers Academy community, which was under better circumstances, but it was just a bittersweet moment because, you know, Mashea, the community, the culture that you built is incredible. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak with the kids, as well as I have prepared a poem that I wrote specifically for them, for that community, for that moment. And it is a poem entitled, just to circle back for a quick second. I talked a little bit about the multi-pronged approach that it takes, and part of that approach is working with each other, and pull it up here. Working with each other, and a part of working with each other is defining how we see each other. And so therefore I wrote a poem entitled When I See You. It goes a little something like, when I see you, I see all my hopes and all my wishes. When I see you, I see all my makes and all my misses. When I see you, I see all my promise and all my potential. When I see you, I see all my hardships and how it weighs on my mental. What I see beauty within the struggle. What I see is pride, is heart, is hustle. What I see is God's work in his creation. What I see is true self-worth that needs no validation. And it is my greatest hope, when you see me, you see determination, you see fire. When you see me, you see resiliency, even when things seem dire. When you see me, you see your wealth, you see your health. When you see me, you see your brother, you see yourself. Thank you. I would have had that queued up, by the way. I thought we were going to Q&A, then I was going to, okay. That's not bad.
It's all good. I bet nobody wants to answer questions.
No.
But we will open to questions from the audience. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to remaining connected, but answering your questions now going into Q&A.
So my name is Dr. Smith. Dr. Ben, I'm an adolescent psychologist. I'm actually here with media. I happened to be walking by and wandered in. I work with kids and build technologies, support youth and mental health. I was curious, first, what are you doing to support the emotional wellness of your student population? And more importantly, what do you need to add more support to support those kids? Because there's a direct correlation between what they're living with, their academic performance, and their emotional states. So,
Do you mind if I take that first from a player's perspective? So we have underneath the Evolve Foundation a curriculum called Reading and Running. So it is a holistic approach, R&R for the kids, we call it. It's a holistic approach when it comes to literacy, when it comes to exercise. And a part of that day, part of that experience is the tangibility, right? For a person, a player, someone that they look up to, is not only motivational, inspirational, but aspirational, to come and be hands-on and provide a day filled with things that you can't quantify, you can't measure. There is no data that you could put on engagement, that you could put on happiness, that you could put on expression, right? And I remember when Daryl Green came to my school for when I was in elementary school, he came to my school the first time. I said, man, I want to be Daryl. I want to play football. I want to play defense. I want to play quarterback. And hell, if I didn't do it, but without that experience, I would have never had that not once again, motivation or even inspiration and aspiration to feel like that goal was within reach. So a part of what Players Coalition does is be boots on ground and to be fully engaged with our communities, for our kids to be able to touch, see, feel, that what they see just not on TV. So thank you for having me share that just once again from a player's perspective.
And I just want to add, Kyle, the last time I heard you read the poem to Marcos was there. And I'm sitting here thinking, Do people see DeMarco's here? Do they hear DeMarco's here? So thank you for sharing that. To answer your question, my simple answer is movement, mentoring, and money. And so our kids need to move. Like all the research says that we've dealt with trauma, we've dealt with any event that is thrown off, let's just say the kids said, like movement helps, so sports, yoga, etc. But the mentoring, we say mentoring because what we really want to say is counseling. Our kid, when these tragedies happened, we came into this year and said every adult and every student has to have access to counseling. We believe that if our adults are okay, our kids will be okay. And counseling is something that's still taboo. That's why we call it coaching. So our kids right now have access to real counseling if they want it, if they need it, and if they're voluntold to do it. And then the last thing I would say is actually money. Tia has mentioned this, we go back and forth. We Uber our kids everywhere. We send them Uber Eats everywhere. And this actually in a couple weeks, we are actually starting what we call a $50 study. It's the idea and motivation that if kids just come to school, like that's all we want, to come to our safe place where we have partners ready to work with them. If you just come to school, you'll get a $50 gift card. We've been piloting for the last 2 weeks, and you would be amazed what $50 means. Wasted $50 at Starbucks this morning. $50 for our scholars is real resource. It means for one kid, every weekend he's staying home on his gaming device instead of being outside. For one kid, it means he can buy meals for his family over the weekend. For another kid, it means that he can actually buy that swag. Like Katie's gonna be here tomorrow in his swag for the Super Bowl, but it means he's able to do something with just $50 that he's earned over a couple of weeks. So for me, it is moving, mentoring, and money.
I sort of don't want to follow up after that, but I'll just be specific to Trigger University. We provide Trigger Tuesdays every Tuesday, 7 p.m. It's a hybrid situation because some youth are unsafe to leave their homes. And then some youth are okay to come to the safe space. So every Tuesday, regardless, rain, sleet, snow, if it has just been a homicide, because that's happened a whole lot. Ironically, we host this safe and sacred space. They share things like I'm at the bus stop and an Uber pulled up and I'm thinking this is about to be my last breath, but they put an umbrella out the car to get back to the Uber rider instead of a gun. They share things like having to pay for their phone bill because they're trying to get a job over having to pay for their lunch, dinner for themselves, their siblings. A lot of our youth are like how I was, sort of like a co-parent and forced into autonomy, and have a lot of responsibility. So $10 a day, actually, our youth are paid a stipend. Economic opportunity prevents gun violence. So we call it a stipend to them. Okay, back to them. But, we're really intentional about protecting them. So Tuesdays are one thing, and we switch it up once every month on Tuesdays, whether it's breath work, and a coach doing that, a facilitator facilitating their breath work, or yoga. We're looking into drama therapy. All of these services are in kind because we have a very inadequate budget. But we have to do things. I was just telling Amber, like I choose sometimes having to provide economic opportunity over paying our director of operations his monthly stipend, and he understands, but that's not the choices we want to have. And then lastly, we've been starting grief groups. We do them monthly. Ideally, we need the funding to work with private clinical mental health professionals because our government is just understaffed, overworked, and really just absence. That's not the prevention that we want. And so we're having to look into and lean on private partners to come in. And we just did our first round of grief group, and there were all boys. We were intentional about that. We weren't trying to be gender-based when we started the vision. But they talked about cognitive-based behavior therapy. How could I forget this? I should have asked you guys how you were doing this morning. We lead every single encounter with permission to feel. How are you doing? Because if our babies can label and understand their emotions and recognize them in themselves and others, because that situational awareness can save them. But if they understand and have high emotional intelligence, then they're able to regulate those emotions and cope. And I'm vulnerable with them. I tell them I've done things that are unhealthy. I bite my nails. I've used the LeBron James on the bench at NC State. And it was because of my, high exposure to violence and anxiety and suppressed depression that I didn't know it. And so now they have these labels in education. Sometimes I get really overwhelmed with how much we're giving them, but that safe space for them to just be. Sometimes we're at Dave & Buster's and I can beat them and put their stipend on the line because I can still shoot, even though I need a knee brace to play. We're giving fun and safety, not just like you said, in the absence of violence, but just in a safe space to be themselves, and we work with youth. Zero, we have youth who have babies on the way, and we're intentional about them. And we work with babies who haven't got here yet, all the way to 26, because we know that's when the brain, by definition, is supposed to be fully developed. But we know what trauma does to that. Yes. So we're intentional. And then when I work with Mashea and hers, they offer therapy to all of their students, and I'm just like, how did you do that? But she makes a way, and that's what we need more model, people model. But it's about learning the practice of talking. And when you come from a culture of gun violence, silence is the way. But we teach our babies that silence is violence. You gotta let it out, you'll implode. So through character development, you learn that you can engage youth in that, you can model it, but you celebrate it. So when we see a youngin bring another youngin to our program because they want their youngin to get some money, or they appear to get some money or get opportunity, we praise that. And so we praise when they're spreading prevention, when they wake up every day and they did not use that gun or pull that trigger. And so all of that revolves around healing. We call it healing opportunity, because mental health is synonymous with life. Like they've made it this category, this thing, but gun violence refers to behavioral health. Mental health is a part of that, but we call it's our healing opportunity.
Well, I'd like to pledge to support 10 of those students. So I developed social emotional software. It's AI based. I want to give all of your students, so like in your school, full access to this. Called Gnosis IQ, lifetime licenses for your entire school population. But so I'll make sure I know where to bend.
And can you just say on the mic, because we did this, can you say I am prevention? Because that's what you're doing. Thank you. It means the world.
I am prevention.
Thank you. I want to tell my baby that.
And all of our panels will be around for a bit afterwards as well, so we'll make sure that connection happens. So thank you so much for that. That's powerful. Got another question?
Hey, I got one question, guys. My name is Ken Holloway. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. The deep red state, if you guys know. And I used to work as chief of staff for a House representative. And we talked a lot about gun violence. And one thing that the congregation always said was that violence is a morality issue. You can't legislate morality. So when you're in a place like that, where you get no help from them, it's like, oh no, we can't do it. There's nothing we can't do. What with the people that have something they want to do, what can you do?
I'll take it. I can't express enough how much of a discipline we have to have on help, because it can be hopeless. I'm myself and some of our teammates. You'll see these green sneakers. They are from, one of the kids that was lost in Uvalde. The only way that she was able to be identified was because of her green sneakers. When that happened in Texas, we did not have this mass, amount of new policies, and we didn't have like members of Congress running back to DC to change policies. But what we did have was incredible advocates who were turned into advocates because of this tragedy that happened to them. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want people, survivors, to have to lead these movements because we've left them out in the lurch for such a long time. So we are determined. We've had so much movement over the last just 5 or 6 years. When I tell you that we went from $0 and us going in front of Congress, shaming them and saying, literally, shame on you, to members of Congress, and really wrapping our arms around people like Congressman Pierson and people like Congresswoman Lucy McBath that are doing the right thing and saying, what do you all need to be supported? What data do you need? What research do you need? We have incredible Black and brown researchers and policy people across the country who are leading this work. We had every research. We had the fanciest Harvard studies. We have all of that. And that's what, having worked in policy for now almost 25 years, that's like what we needed to show them was we have the evidence that shows everything we're talking about works. There is nothing here that is just, it's innovative, but none of this stuff is just like, let's throw it up against the wall and see whether or not it works. We know that it works. And so we give it to people. We said this yesterday, that we go into politicians' offices or policymakers' office and we tell them all the different facts and we give them a choice. Like, you can either pay for peace and you can have peace on the front end, or you're going to continue to pay for violence when it happens in your communities. And when they don't want peace, then we hold them accountable for that. And we've come to a place where we have the ability, we have the people, we've been organizing, we have the communities on the ground that are doing this work every single day. And so I think like 15, 20 years ago was happening, maybe just disparately, it was happening in different communities, not people building these coalitions and doing things like they're doing in Newark and what people are doing now in Texas and across the country. But we've made huge, having $14.1 billion, and that's a small amount of the money. There's much more that has actually been on the state level and the local level is huge, but we need much more. And so we're going to continue to demand it on every level of government, and we just have to stay disciplined and as we continue to do this work.
Can I add? I mean, the simple answer is it takes courage. It takes courage to step out, as a Players Coalition has stepped out way early on these issues. So like, kudos to you guys, because it literally takes courage. I have worked with Democrats, independents. I'm right now on a state board of ed by a Republican governor. And what I say is, we know the answers, but let's talk about it differently. For example, we know that data and research says that if kids from 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock in the evening are engaged in meaningful relationships, activities, being in safe places, that they're less likely to be in violent situations. So fine, give us money for after school programs. If that is what is going to make you feel excited about supporting gun violence prevention, then let's call it after school. I'll tell you, again, I would much rather be here talking about how last year I had 72 African-American kids take the AP computer science exam, that's 10th grade. Like, that's what I would prefer to be talking about. But when I went to my funders and said, listen, like, the last year was terrible, but this second year is worse. The anniversaries, the birthdays, the social media, like, we need more help now. You know what they said? We don't do gun violence. And so I'm like, well, do you do developing the next generation of innovators? They say yes. I'm like, okay, well then it's after school programs, it's mentoring, it's counseling, it's social emotional health and support. People are getting a little bit more comfortable with. And so I do think times that language matters, words matters, but at the end of the day, it just takes courage. And I just, again, applaud the Players Coalition for the courage that you had several years ago to step up on these issues.
And I just want to chime in and just say, the answers aren't always going to be in government. Like, the answers truly are in community, and organizing and getting together and And one, pulling in like even businesses and other folks, like there are other places to get money besides government. And there are other ways to attack problems besides policy change. But in doing that organizing, and what you can get is a coalition big enough to then vote out some of those folks who are blocking the policy change. So I wouldn't let Mississippi is a special place. We would not let, the obstacles you're up against, like, again, that hope being a discipline, cause you to just kind of throw up your hands like, no, there are incredible folks on the ground there. There's an incredible mayor in Jackson. And it's just like getting the community together, pulling other people and broadening that coalition. And then if that team is building, you will be able to get some of those folks out and slowly get to that change. But don't let it stop you from stepping out and doing the work.
Thank you.
All right, looks like that's all our questions. Again, thank you everyone for being here. Congratulations one more time to our new grant partners. And
By the way, we'll also all be available for our cash apps. So just do sign. God bless you.
Thank you, guys. We are prevention.
Thank you.